Gemara on Memam Base 40b. Okay, and the discussion is okay. So it seems we have a contradiction in the Brisa. The Brisa says that if you have somebody borrows an ox and he does not realize the ox is in wood, then him and the master, him and the owner both pay half. The second half of the Brisa says that if he gives back the ox and it became a muad in his domain, so somebody borrowed an ox that was a tam, and then it became a muad in his domain, and he gives it back to the original owner pays half. The problem the Gemara had was that the implication here is what we call Rishus Mishana. Can you lose the status of muad by changing ownership control? Now, if you, in other words, if muad is dependent on the same ownership, the same control of the animal, so then if the end of the mission makes sense, it became a muad in the house of the child, the house of the borrower, then it changes control. Now it's in the control of the owner. So the muad clock restarts, the animal's treated like it's a tam. However, if we go the other way, if the first part of the mission would be difficult. In other words, the animal was a muad in the domain, in the control of the owner. Then the owner lends it out to a borrower. So if it's the case that changing control would change the status of muad, so then the status of muad should be eliminated. Why is it that we treat the animal as a muad and we say half of it the borrower pays and half of it the owner pays? We should treat it as a tam, and only the borrower should pay half because the control changed. So the Gemara says tafra, basically you break the Brisa in half, and you're right, the first author and the second author are different. Okay, so now we get to Rabba. Little less than halfway down the page. Rabba Amar, Mida Reisha Rishus Eina Mishana, Seifanami Rishus Eina Mishana. Because we see in the first scenario is the scenario where a guy borrows an animal that's in wood. He borrows an animal that's in wood, and 1 second. And he doesn't reckon, he borrowed an animal that he did not realize was a muad. He pays half, the owner pays half. Obviously, it's the case that the animal is still a muad, despite the fact that the control has changed. Originally, it was in the control of the owner. Now it's in control of the borrower, because the borrower borrowed it. So, since we find in the beginning of the Brisa that the changing of control does not change the muad status, so therefore it must be safe and nami or just mishana. The end of the Mishnah is also the case. It's also the case that just because you give it back to the borrower, gives it back to the lender, it doesn't change its status of a muad. Well, if that's the case, if the borrower giving it back to the lender does not change the muad status, so then why does the muad? If the animal became a muad in the control of the borrower, and now the borrower gives it back to the lender, we'd say the lender only pays half damages. Why? Why should he pay half damages? He should pay full muad damages. Okay, so what's the reason? Okay, this is an interesting argument. Let me see what the article says about this. Just curious. How is it? Okay, so the way the notes in the article put this, I would have explained it a little differently, but I think that he's a much much more conservative shot explanation. Okay, now he's explaining as follows: because the animal is control of the borrower. You know how it is when you borrow something, right? The old adage about rental cars. You never buy a rental car; they're always mistreated. So in a certain sense, you borrow an animal, you don't treat it with the same, you don't watch it as well as the owner. So therefore, it's actually different. an animal that becomes a muad in the borrower's possession is not the same as an animal that becomes a muad in the owner's possession. And that's because the borrower doesn't bother to watch the animal. He doesn't suffer the same long-term consequences that the owner would. Therefore, when it goes back to the original owner, it's not considered a muad. Why? Because the circumstances that made it into a muad were not the same circumstances that would make it into a muad under a regular owner. So it's a muad as long as it's in the domain of the borrower. But once it goes back to the original owner, who presumably will watch it better, the animal is not a muad. Okay, Rapapa says, "Me to say for Rishus Mishana, Reishanami Rishus Mishana." Rapapa goes the other way. He says, "Look, if the second half of the brisa, which states that if the animal was in the domain of the borrower and became a muad under the borrower's control, now it goes back to the lender only pays half damages. Why is this? Because Rishus Mishana. Because if the control of the animal shifts, then we say that, give me a second, if the control of the animal shifts, then we say that the muad status changes. So you can't carry over the muad status from the borrower to the owner. Okay, if that's the case, then what about the first part of the Mishnah? A guy borrows an animal not realizing it's a muad. Why don't we say the same thing? The muad status does not carry over from the owner to the borrower. Okay, so me to say Rishus Mishana, Reishanam Rishus Mishana. Okay, since the second half of the Mishnah says that that change of control does change muad status, must be the first half is the same story. For Reisha time. Okay, so going back to the first line of the brisa, why is it the case that if the guy didn't realize it's a muad, we still treat it as a muad, only that the borrower has to pay half and the original owner has to pay the other half? It's a higher time. What's the reason? And the reason for this is because since the animal was nisiyayit, it became a muad under the owner's domain. Wherever it goes, the name of the owner goes with it. As everybody knows that it's his animal. So therefore, you don't loot when it became a muad in the owner's control, and then it goes out of the owner's control to the borrower's control. It's still considered a muad. The reverse, though, is not true, because if it became a muad under the borrower's control, the borrower's name is not attached to the animal because the borrower does not own the animal. Okay.
The rental car analogy is actually quite a good analogy because it's always an enterprise rental car. It's never your car that you get back. When you rent a car, okay, it's always an enterprise rental car. It's never Rimmer's enterprise rental car.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I cheat the car as well, but
Yeah.
I know. And Hertz cars are always more damaged than Enterprise.
Okay, yeah.
Whatever, but okay. Anyway, Iboilahu. Ma'al Gavim is back. Okay, it's a very interesting Gemara, and let's say some unusual events that typically happen in Talmud Bavli. Okay, Ma'al Gavim is back. So here's the question. I'm sorry, we skipped two lines here. Okay, the Gemara is going here on the Shoretz Daden. Shoretz Daden is the what's the word here?
Arena.
The arena animal where you how do you say you instigated the animal. So this animal was instigated into killing. Okay, so now an animal that kills is not suitable for sacrifice. What about an animal that was instigated into killing? Maligam is back. Can you bring it as a sacrifice? Rav says kosher, you could. Shmuel Amar Posel, you can't. Rav Amar kosher, Rav says you could. Why? Onasu. The animal is under duress, i.e., in an act of its own accord. You sort of the person, the instigator, instigated it. But Shmuel Amar Posel Harinevet by Avera. Shmuel says it's invalid because ultimately speaking, it was involved in sin. Meisves. The Gemara asks. The Gemara brings the brayso that discusses this. Minha behema. Okay, so this is right in the beginning of Chumash Vayikra. The Torah says you could bring a sacrifice from the animals, from the goats, from the sheep. Okay. From means it's a limitation that there are some you could bring and others you can't bring. Okay, what do we see from there? Min habehema, from amongst the animals, meaning some animals you could bring. Lahaitis or revea, excluding an animal that was an animal that was involved in bestiality, whether as a male or as a female. Min habokar, from amongst the cattle. Lahaitzi es nevad, to exclude the possibility of an animal that was worshipped. Min hatzayin lahaitzi es muktzah. From amongst the sheep, to exclude muktzah. Muktzah means it was set aside for idol sacrifice. Umin hatzayin, there's an extra vav there. Lahaitzi es negach, to exclude the possibility of bringing an animal that gorged. Amr of Shimon. So the Bryce continues. Rav Shimon says, "Im nemer revea lama nemer negach. Im nemer negach lama nemer revea." We talk about here about two sins. We talk about bestiality and we talk about sins, like in loose term. Let's just explain this for a moment. We talk about the sins and we talk about an animal, quote unquote, sinning. Let's understand that there are instances where an animal is killed for certain behavior. And those instances are treated equivalent to a sin. For example, if an animal gores or an animal is either is involved in bestiality, whether on the male or the female side, the animal is killed. And for this type of penalty, it's the same status as if a human is being killed, meaning we require a court of 23, and the threshold for evidence is quite high. Okay, so why does it have to specify both categories? The category of bestiality and where the animal gores someone to death. So the Gemara says, there is really there's really some major distinctions between the two categories. Revea, in the case of bestiality, also by einis karotzen. In the case of bestiality, whether the animal was willingly involved or unwillingly involved, it makes no difference. Okay, let's explain this again. In the sense, the presumption here is that if the animal was involved in bestiality on the female side, it had no quote unquote choice. Not that an animal ever has a choice, but it wasn't involved in destructive activity, let's say. Whereas if it's involved in bestiality on the male side, a male that rapes a human woman, then it's aggressive willpower that created that event. Okay, so revea, an animal that was a female animal that was involved in bestiality, and obviously, whether this could very well be a male as well. Also, by einis karotzen, we treat an einis a under duress, meaning without willingness. It did not partake in aggressive sexual activity because it was the victim in this scenario. We treat, doesn't make a difference. The animal's still killed. Negeach, an animal that gores someone to death. With regard to goring someone to death, we do not treat a casual murder like an intentional death. Okay, what does that mean? That means that there's a distinction between an animal goring somebody to death and an animal walking and, I don't know, accidentally pushing an infant to death or something without seeming intention. Okay. Negech mashalom kaifer, reveh and mashalom kaifer. Negech, an animal that gores, pays kaifer. Reveh, an animal that was involved in bestiality, and mashalom is a kaifer. Reveh does not pay kaifer. So the chutzer kleimer reveh, chutzer kleimer negech. It was necessary for the Bryce to say reveh and negech, to say an animal involved in bestiality and an animal that gores a person to death. Katani mias, the Bryce states, revea also by einis karotzen, negach loy also by einis karotzen. The Bryce states very clearly that with regard to negach, goring a human being to death, there is a difference between whether the animal intended, i.e., it engaged in destructive behavior, knowingly destructive that caused death, it gored someone to death, versus a scenario where it sort of trampled somebody, where it doesn't appear that it was intentional, or, for example, it It killed somebody without looking. Let's say it was just walking, and it killed a baby by pushing it. Again, without what seems to be an intentional push. Maybe pushed it with the side of its body. It seems to be unintentional. Okay, so clearly there is such a distinction. If that's the case, lamai helchasa, what difference does this distinction make? Lav lakarban. It's a difference with regard to bringing a sacrifice. In other words, an animal that intentionally harms, it gores someone to death, that animal brings a sacrifice. An animal that casually tramples a person to death, a baby to death, let's say, does not bring a sacrifice. I'm sorry, can be brought as a sacrifice because it did not act intentionally. This would be a question on the opinion of Shmuel. Shmuel says it's prohibited to bring it as a sacrifice. Rav says it's permitted. The Brisa here seems to imply that it would be permitted to bring it as a sacrifice. So Gemara says, "Loi," not referring to sacrifice, like tola, to kill it as a penalty. In other words, we only kill an animal that gores human beings to death. We do not kill an animal that, let's say, sort of casually tramples human beings to death. Okay. This makes sense. Di amrit l'karban. One second. Yeah, it makes sense that this distinction exists with regard to the question of whether the animal should be killed or not. Why? Because if we're saying this distinction is relevant to bringing a sacrifice, okay, let's explain this. With regard to bringing a sacrifice, as we saw, how do we know that an animal that gores cannot be brought as a sacrifice? Because it says min habakar. Does the Torah make a distinction between whether the animal was killed, gored to kill, or whether the animal killed casually trampled? No, there's no such distinction. It's only with regard to the death penalty where the Torah makes a distinction, which we'll get to soon. We'll discuss exactly what that distinction is. Today, if not today, tomorrow or the next day. So therefore, with regard to bringing a sacrifice, the Torah never makes a distinction between an animal that kills, between whether killed with intention or without intention. It must be like Tola with regard to killing of the animal. It makes a difference how the animal killed another animal. Okay, continuing the same brisa. Continuing the brisa. An animal that gores pays kaifer. A revea, an animal that rapes, does not pay kaifer. So the Gemara wants to know exactly what happened. Hey chidami, is it the case the animal raped a woman and killed it? Malik tola. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, Malik kitla b'karna, Malik kitla b'revia. Why would, in other words, kaifer is paid for killing the person? In other words, the owner of the aggressor animal pays kaifer if his animal kills somebody. We had a debate whether or not you pay half kaifer for a tam, or we're talking here about a muad. Regardless, either we're talking about a tam and half kaifer, or we're talking about a muad. So let's understand how exactly did the animal kill the person. If when the Gemara suggests the possibility that revea, bestiality, would have to pay kaifer, what's the scenario? If the animal didn't kill, so then the reason why there's no payment of kaifer is because the animal didn't kill. If, however, the animal's act of bestiality, the rape of a woman, was also involved in the woman's untimely death, then why shouldn't you pay kaifer? What's the difference whether the animal gores a woman to death or whether it kills the animal by rape, it kills the human woman by raping her? The Ella must be the Rava loy kotla. The animal raped the woman but did not kill her. So the Gemara says, "Hi, delay misham kaifer." The reason why you don't pay kaifer there, mishum loy kotla, because the animal did not kill the person. Maybe kaifer is restricted to specific instances where the animal kills. So the Gemara says, Amar Abai explains, the Rava loy kotla. The animal the animal was involved in the consensual affair. One second. Yeah, in the consensual affair with a woman. Okay, and what happens now? There were witnesses, and now the woman is being executed for the capital punishment of bestiality. Therefore, you might say it's as if the animal killed the woman, right? In other words, the animal didn't act, the act of the conjugal relationship between the animal and the woman was not one that resulted in the woman's untimely death. But the court killing the woman, executing the woman, is involved in the woman's untimely death. Maybe we consider that as if it's the animal, and therefore the animal should have to pay kofar. Malatema, we would think, command the caught the it's as if the animal killed Kamash Malon, that no, there's no payment of kofar. And by the way, the same would also be true if it involved a man. Although obviously it'd be less usual, less common, but the same would be the case. Rava says, it's a scenario where the animal rapes and kills. So you're going to ask me, why does it make a difference if the animal kills by using its horns or by raping the person? So Gemara says, Karen kavanos lahasik. There is a difference, because goring with the horns is intention to do damage. Hi kavanos lahanos atzmai. But in the scenario of an animal raping a person, that would be high kavanos lahanos atzmai. It doesn't intend on killing, and intends on pleasuring itself. Okay. What's the debate between Abaya and Rava? But regal shadoros lagavitinik b'chotzer hanizik. The debate between Abaya and Rava is the same as the following debate. You have a case of regal that killed somebody. Regal is an animal casually walking. Kicking, by the way, kicking with the intention of doing damage is Karen. It's not regal. Regal means the animal was walking and it trampled somebody, just regular walking. So the animal tramples a kid to death. Do you pay a kofar or not? L'abaya mishalem kofar. According to Abaya, you do pay kofar. The Rava loy mishalem kofar. According to Rava, you do not pay kofar. Tani Kavasei the Rav. We have a Bryce that supports the opinion of Rav. 1 second. Shor started enechayv misa v'kosheli on his back. Rav's a shor it started an instigated ox is enechayv misa. You're not chayav for the animal's not liable for the death penalty for murdering somebody, because it didn't actually intend to murdering, it was just instigated. The koshel on his back, and it's kosher for a sacrifice. And because it is as if the animal was forced. Okay. Sure, shenogach adam umes. You have an animal that gores somebody and kills him. If the animal is a muad, it's already established as a violent animal. Mishalem kofar, it pays kofar. The tam potem and a kofar, and a tam, a non-violent animal, is exempt from kofar for killing somebody. And regardless, any animal, whether it's a tam or it's a muad, the animal is put to death for murdering a human being. This is similarly true. Whether it kills a male or a female. Let's say it kills a slave or a maidservant, an indentured one. So this is this is a knas, a penalty payment. It's a flat payment of 30 coins. Even if the guy is the most skilled profession in Talmud, which is, what's the most skilled profession in Talmud? Pearl driller. A pearl driller. Okay. Or whether the guy is worth not even a quarter of a coin. The guy is extremely useless. Doesn't make a difference. It's a flat payment of 30 coins. Okay, so now we have a technical problem. Okay. How exactly do you become a muad for killing human beings? Right? You kill a human being, the animal's supposed to be put to death. And then it somehow managed to kill two more human beings before now we talk about paying kofar. Now, when would you pay kofar? Either the third or the fourth animal. We'll get to it. For now, we'll talk about the third animal. So they had to kill two human beings, get a death penalty for both of them, but somehow avoid being executed. What exactly is going on? How is this possible? You kill the animal even when it's tam. How is it possible for the animal to become a muad? Okay, so the Gemara offers probably about 6 or 7 answers, one after another. So let's go. Amar Rabba. Rabba says first solution is the first scenario is where they evaluate the person. 1 second, I'm sorry. Okay. This is an interesting, this is the modeling, right? That comes out with the coronavirus and kill 15 million people. It didn't. The modelers always they overpredict everything, right? So they modeled that based on this animal's behavior and based on the amount of people who walked by, it would have killed 3 people. If not for the fact that those 3 people, I don't know, jumped into a safe room or something, they jumped over the fence and the animal couldn't kill them. So they modeled, this was Shamdu, there was a model, they modeled that it would have killed 3 people, except that those 3 people escaped by the skin of their teeth. So the animal still called them muads. Ravashi says, umdino lav klumhu. Modeling is a useless exercise. You can't evaluate, these 3 people escaped in the nick of time, so therefore it must be that that they would have been killed. You have no clue if they would have been killed or not. And they escaped by the nick of time. Yeah, it could be that they escaped in the nick of time, but it could be that they also wouldn't have been killed anyway. You can't model these questions. So Ravashi rejects the first opinion. Ella, it must be Hachmayaskinis. Ravashi offers his own suggestion. Okay, so this time the animal actually molds 3 people. But what happened? They had a miraculous surgery, special doctor, a new procedure was developed, and they all survived. So now the modeling is not that the animal would have gored them. The modeling is that they would have died otherwise. Whereas Zvid says Zvid has a simple solution. The animal gores 3 animals. So it's a muad. So the Gemara says, does that mean that you must, in other words, so according to Zvid, the only interpretation of the Mishnah would be according to the opinion that says that if you're a muad to kill animals, the animal's a muad to kill human beings as well. The Gemara does not prefer. The Gemara offers another suggestion. Al-Amr of Simi. If Simi suggests, the animal gores 3 non-Jews. So it's a muad to killing non-Jews. So the Gemara says a muad l'avichavim have a muad Yisrael. So do you mean to say that an animal that's a muad to kill non-Jews is also a muad to kill Jews? And the Gemara is not sure that assumption is correct. So the Gemara says another suggestion. Okay. So basically, the animal killed 3 people that would not have lived through the year, 3 people that were terminally ill and were going to die very, very soon. So the Gemara says also, does that mean that an animal that gores basically people who are about to die is the same as an animal that gores people that will live? Maybe not. Right? In English, we call it confounding variables. What happened was the animal killed and it ran away. The kotel v'arig la'agma killed a second time and it ran away a second time. Okay, so we have an animal that can kill multiple times and still be around. Rabacha Breder of Ika Amar, Rabacha the son of Ravika says, okay, it's a very interesting scenario. What happened was, the animal kills, 2 witnesses testify the animal kills. And then what happens? 2 witnesses come and say, your testimony is false. How do you say your testimony is false? Imano hayisim. You couldn't testify about this event because you were with us at the same time somewhere else. And this happens twice. So the animal's already killed twice, except that the witnesses that say the animal killed are lying in both cases. They're liars. Okay, now what happens? The animal kills a 3rd time. And the witnesses come and say, animals killed a 3rd time. And now more witnesses come and say that those 2 witnesses that said the first 2 witnesses are liars are actually liars. You got it? So the first pair of witnesses their testimony stands. Okay, so let's go. Let's explain. Now it's a technical problem here. So, okay, okay, so now remember, we had this famous question. We discussed this a couple of times past few days. We spoke about it last week also, which is how does an animal become a muad? Is the fundamentals of muad because the owner didn't watch it, or is the fundamentals of muad because the animal becomes violent? Okay, so if it means the animal becomes violent, in this case, obviously, clearly the animal became violent. We have now 3 sets of testimony, the animal is murderous. That makes sense. However, if the point of muad is to warn the person, so what happens here, the person didn't have enough warning. Why? Because the owner thought, well, look, my animal's not a murderous animal because the first 2 sets of witnesses, they're liars. Now that they actually were saying the truth, and the ones who declare them liars were themselves liars, so the first witnesses were valid. Well, okay, give me another 3 days at least to take a deep breath to make sure I can wash my animal. So Gemara says, a simple solution here. Okay, so what happened was as follows. Again, 2 witnesses come. Reuben and Shimon come and testify that the animal kills day 1. They testify day 2. The animal killed day 2. Then Levi and Yehudah come along. Levi, Yehudah, by the way, and Reuben and Shimon are not brothers. Okay, nobody's related here. It's all kosher witnesses. So Levi and Yehudah say that Reuben and Shimon are lying. Why are they lying? Because they were in LA at the time that the alleged incident happened in Portland. And then what happens? Yisachar and Zvulun come along, and they say that Levi and Yehudah are liars. And not only are Levi and Yehudah liars, because Levi and Yehudah were not in LA, Levi and Yehudah were in Portland that day. So there's no way they could have testified that Reuben and Shimon were in LA. Not only that, Levi and Yehudah not in LA, but also the owner witnessed all 3 events. So now, do we have any doubt here whether the owner saw the killings or not? Of course we don't have a doubt. We have witnesses that say he saw the killings. So how could he argue? How could the owner say, well, I believe the witnesses, but then I didn't believe them? You saw it. Okay. That's the solution of Rav Papa. I'm sorry, of Rav Acha Bar Ravika. Okay. Ravina says another simple solution. They recognize the animal's owner. Let's say it has a certain type of name tag or branding. But they don't know which animal it was. So the Gemara says, what is the guy supposed to do? So the Gemara says, basically, so they again, Reuben and Shimon testify that they saw an animal killing. They don't know which animal it was. The next day they say it was the same animal. We still don't know which one it was. And the 3rd day they recognize the animal. And they say the same animal killed the 3rd time. So this is how it's possible to pay kaifer. The animal's a muad that kills, you pay kaifer. And in this case, the owner was warned. Why? Because he knew that he had a wild animal in his flock. He should have watched the entire flock. Okay. We'll stop.